The mansion's grand dining hall was meant to impress, every detail meticulously arranged for this crucial evening. The polished oak table stretched long and wide, set with gleaming silverware, crystal goblets, and centerpieces of rare white orchids. Waiters moved quietly along the edges of the room, their shoes silent against the marble floor. At the head of the table sat Mr. Harlow, the billionaire host, dressed in a tailored suit so precise it seemed to mirror his need for control. Yet beneath his calm exterior, tension coiled tight in his chest. Across from him sat two Japanese executives, men of high status and quiet authority. They spoke softly to one another in their native tongue, their words flowing in rapid Japanese, smooth as a stream, but utterly indecipherable to the rest of the room. The silence that followed each attempt at conversation grew unbearable. The advisors Mr. Harlow had trusted for this deal shuffled awkwardly, flipping through files as though the right paper might miraculously contain a translation. The translators he had hired were nowhere to be seen, stuck in traffic, perhaps, or lost entirely, but their absence felt like betrayal in this moment. Every second stretched thin, every smile from the executives more strained. Mr. Harlow drummed his fingers against the wood, the sound sharp in the heavy quiet. His empire had been built on power and precision. Tonight, both seemed to slip from his grasp. He glanced at his staff, lined obediently against the walls. Their eyes stayed fixed on the floor, too terrified to meet his glare. The executives exchanged another stream of words in Japanese, their brows knitting slightly. Mr. Harlow's pride burned hot. He had invited them here to secure an alliance, to show strength and sophistication, and instead he looked like a fool, unable to hold a simple conversation. A wave of humiliation rushed through him, and with it came anger. He slammed his palm flat against the table, the thud so loud the glasses rattled. "What is this nonsense?" he thundered, his voice echoing through the chandeliers. "Not one of you can understand a word they're saying. Not one." The staff stiffened, the waiters froze mid-step, and even the executives went silent at the sharpness of his tone. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the chandelier above. Mr. Harlow's jaw clenched tight, his frustration growing heavier with every breath. The weight of his empire's reputation pressed down on him, and for the first time in years, he felt the creeping edge of helplessness. The staff remained frozen along the walls, their eyes darting nervously but never lifting to meet their employers. The weight of Mr. Harlow's fury pressed down on them like a suffocating fog. No one dared to speak, no one dared to breathe too loudly. The billionaire's lips pressed into a thin line, his face flushed with the mix of anger and embarrassment he was unaccustomed to feeling. He had always been the man in control, the one who orchestrated every deal, dictated every move, and bent situations to his will. But now, here in his own home, before two executives whose approval he desperately needed, he was powerless. The Japanese guests exchanged glances, polite yet uncertain. One of them cleared his throat softly, trying to bridge the silence with a few hesitant words in English, but his accent was thick, his vocabulary limited. The attempt only highlighted the gap between the two sides. Mr. Harlow clenched his jaw, biting back another outburst. To lash out at his guests would be unforgivable, but to sit in silence was equally damaging. His advisors shifted uneasily in their seats, pretending to check their notes or sip from their water glasses, but their avoidance only deepened his irritation. He was not paying them to look helpless. The frustration inside him grew like a storm cloud. He muttered under his breath, words laced with venom. "Billions on the line, and I'm surrounded by incompetence." His voice was low, but sharp enough that several staff members flinched. His pride had always been his shield, but tonight it betrayed him. Every second of awkward silence chipped away at the commanding image he had built. He tapped his fingers restlessly on the table, the sound cracking like a metronome of failure. By the corner of the room, a young maid stood with a silver tray balanced in her hands. She had been invisible all evening, moving quietly as she poured wine and refilled water glasses. Her training had taught her to remain silent, to blend into the background, to be present but never noticed. Yet now, as she watched the scene unfold, she felt something stir inside her, a pull stronger than fear. She could see the humiliation burning in her employer's face, the polite discomfort in the guests, and the uneasy tension thickening the air. Her fingers tightened around the tray as her thoughts raced. She knew she wasn't meant to intervene, but she also knew she held something no one else in the room could offer. She set the tray down gently, careful not to make a sound, her mind already made up for a moment, her heart thudding in her chest. She had spent years in this house walking silently along polished floors, her presence acknowledged only when needed, and forgotten the moment she stepped back into the shadows. Tonight, however, her silence weighed differently. The shame building in the room was unbearable, and she knew, though it was not her place, that she could break it. She inhaled deeply, steadying her nerves, then stepped forward, the soft click of her shoes startling in the hush. All eyes turned to her at once. The advisors frowned, confused by her boldness, while the waiters stiffened, certain she was about to be reprimanded. Mr. Harlow's gaze snapped toward her, sharp and questioning, his irritation barely concealed. But before he could speak, the maid bowed slightly toward the executives, her posture respectful yet assured. When she opened her mouth, the room shifted. Her voice flowed with calm clarity, each syllable in flawless Japanese. She addressed the guests directly, her tone warm and polite, acknowledging the honor of their visit and expressing her employer's intentions with precision. The words rolled off her tongue naturally, elegantly, like a melody she had known all her life. The executives' eyes widened in astonishment, their stiff expressions melting into smiles of relief. One of them leaned forward eagerly, replying in Japanese, his tone instantly more relaxed. Without hesitation, the maid responded, translating seamlessly for Mr. Harlow. The silence that had weighed so heavily on the room evaporated. Laughter bubbled from the guests as they realized communication was no longer a barrier. Their shoulders relaxed, and one even clapped his hands together lightly, as though delighted by the unexpected turn. Around the table, jaws dropped. The advisors looked at one another in disbelief, the waiters stared openly, and Mr. Harlow himself sat frozen in his chair, his anger completely disarmed. He had demanded competence, and here it was, not from his high-paid team of professionals, but from the maid who had gone unnoticed for years. The executives leaned into the conversation now, speaking animatedly, gesturing as though the dam had broken. The maid's voice guided the dialogue effortlessly, her translations precise yet natural, her composure steady. She was no longer just a servant in the background, she was the center of the room, commanding respect with nothing more than her knowledge and grace. Mr. Harlow, for the first time that evening, had nothing to say. He simply stared at her, stunned, as if seeing her for the very first time. The evening, which had begun under the weight of tension and humiliation, now flowed with an ease that surprised everyone present. The executives laughed softly between bites of food, their once guarded expressions replaced with warmth and familiarity. Each time they spoke, the maid translated seamlessly, her posture graceful, her voice steady. What had seemed like a looming disaster transformed into a dinner alive with conversation and possibility. The staff along the walls glanced at one another in disbelief. They had never seen her step beyond her quiet duties, never imagined she possessed such a gift. Mr. Harlow sat back in his chair, his glass of wine untouched, watching her intently. His sharp features, once tightened with fury, now betrayed something he rarely allowed anyone to see: uncertainty. The empire he had built had always depended on control, on making others bend to his will. Yet here he was, forced to admit that the success of this night, perhaps even the entire deal, now rested in the hands of the very person he had barely noticed before. His pride wrestled with his gratitude. He wanted to feel irritated that she had kept such a skill hidden, yet kept pushing the anger aside. For the first time in years, he realized that power didn't always come from wealth or position, but from unexpected places. When dessert was served, the executives rose to their feet and bowed deeply toward the maid, thanking her with genuine respect. One even clasped her hands briefly, a gesture of admiration that no one in the room missed. She bowed in return, her expression humble but her gaze unwavering. She had not sought recognition, but in that moment she earned it from men who commanded international boardrooms. After the guests departed, their departure filled with handshakes and promises of future cooperation, the room emptied, leaving only silence and the faint clink of dishes being cleared. Mr. Harlow remained seated, his eyes fixed on the maid. For once, his voice lacked its usual sharpness. It was softer, almost cautious, as he asked, "Where did you learn to speak like that?" The question hung in the air, but even as he asked it, he realized the answer was secondary. The truth was plain. She had saved him from disgrace, and more than that, she had revealed a strength that no wealth could buy. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, a rare trace of humility crossing his face. "You've been invisible in this house for too long," he murmured, half to her, half to himself. And though he would never admit it aloud, he knew that tonight had changed something fundamental, not just in the deal, but in the way he saw the people who surrounded him every day. "Would you like me to write a continuation showing what happens to the maid after this night, whether Mr. Harlow promotes her, tests her, or if her secret skill opens an entirely new path for her?"